Hey there and welcome back to the channel. This channel's been really dedicated to helping people new to this whole thing get started in music production. And a really big part of that is knowing what to get. So today I'm gonna outline step by step everything you may or may not need to get started in music production. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a clear direction on the things you may need to get, or you may realize that you have everything you need already to get started. But let's stop talking about starting and get right into the video. This video is sponsored by TrackLib. More about them later in the video. I'm gonna go through everything you're gonna need step by step, but at the end of this video, if you think that you may need to revisit a section, all of the chapters below on this timeline are going to be there so that if you need to go back and check out a specific section of this video or revisit or save it for later, you can do that. Firstly, we need to define what is music production. What are we even talking about here? When I say music production, I don't just mean tracking vocals to a beat, and I also don't mean mixing or mastering. What I mean by music production is creating music from the ground up using a combination of samples, virtual instruments, and recording things into a microphone. And this can be very different depending on what genre you're in. If you're doing folk, Americana, or country, you're gonna do a lot more tracking into a microphone. You're gonna need an array of microphones to track things like drums, and you're just gonna approach how you think about a lot of these things very differently. Versus if you're making maybe trap, pop, or EDM music, you're gonna use much more virtual instruments and sample-based music creation tools. So depending on what genre you're working in, let's keep that in mind as we go through each of these sections. So first thing to attack is we're gonna need something to work on. Now, this can be a computer. Most people are probably gonna choose a computer. This could also be something like an iPad, or there are even iPhone applications now that can be very useful in music production. And if you're getting started, there's a lot of things that you can do with iPad and iPhone to kind of dip your toe and make sure this is something that you want to do before you maybe spend a ton of money on a computer that's going to handle a heavier workload. The computer has a lot more accessibility when it comes to third-party plugins or non-native plugins. There's a lot more developed for the computer already, and most people work in a computer environment, whether it's a laptop or maybe like a Mac Studio or some sort of tower. But the tablets have come a long way for music production, specifically the iPad, with Logic being native on the iPad now, with the M1 chips being extremely powerful. You're starting to see a lot more plugin developers like FabFilter, Bliss, Plugins that Knock. Some of these mainstays in the production world are starting to make iPad available plugins. But a big issue is if you buy them on iPad, they're not going to transfer over to a computer if you decide to upgrade to a larger system. I think both options are viable, but I tend to lean towards the computer, especially when you're first starting out. You probably have access to some laptop or computer, maybe a family computer or something like that, and you can use that to get started and start dabbling in music production. Pretty much most computers nowadays are going to be powerful enough to run the basic level of plugins that you would need. So now that we have something to work on, we need to find something to work in, namely our DAW, or our digital audio workstation, also known as a DAW or a DAW. In this software, you're going to be able to record audio, edit that audio, move it around however you need to, and then also add samples that have been recorded, add a software instrument in on the track and record digitally into that, as well as export and a bunch of other functions that can kind of depend on what your DAW of choice does. Some really popular ones are Ableton Live, Logic Pro, Pro Tools, Cubase. There's a ton more paid ones that you can kind of dive into if none of those suit your fancy. And there's a couple free ones. If you're a Mac user or an iPad user, you have access to GarageBand. It comes on the device as soon as you buy an Apple product. There's even an iPhone version of it as well, I do believe. Or you could use something like Reaper, which has a free use option. Regardless of what you hear on the internet, there's not one best option. It really has to do with how your brain works and how you use the tool. So for instance, for me, I use Ableton Live primarily and Pro Tools primarily. So, and by primarily, I mean, I use them for different things. So I use Ableton Live when I'm songwriting, producing, using MIDI, using more digital sample manipulation things. I use Ableton Live for all of those functionalities. And then when I'm ready to edit or mix or master, all of those things get exported and moved over to Pro Tools. And Pro Tools is where I do all of my drum editing, my vocal editing, my time alignment, my mixing, my mastering tends to end up in Pro Tools just because I like it better for that stuff. And for beginners, there's also a ton of free resources out there on YouTube and great channels who specialize in these separate areas. So if you're looking at Ableton Live, this channel here, I talk a lot about Ableton Live. You also have channels like Tatro and Andrew Huang, who both use Ableton Live and have really great tutorials on music production on their channels as well. Austin from Make Pop Music uses Cubase and does a ton of really cool stuff in Cubase there and showcases a lot of its cool functionality. If you're an FL Studio user, there's producer Simon Servita. If you're a Logic Pro user, there's producer Ocean. So now we have our something to work on and our something to work in. We need something to work with. Using samples is a really popular option for music creation. You're going to use things like kicks, snares, hi-hats, vocals, synth sounds, pretty much anything that you can think of that could be audio can be found in a sample, and you can take that and use it to create music. And if you're just starting out and you need a place to find these kinds of samples, I would suggest checking out the sponsor of this video, Tracklib. Tracklib is the online record store for sampling. You can sample over 100,000 different real songs across genres and decades. And using their loop and beat player, it's really easy to find the perfect loop for you to start your song creation with. But especially if you're trying to grow your personal sample library, Tracklib has just launched Sounds, a huge library of royalty-free sounds. So between their record store and their sounds library, they really do have all you need in one monthly subscription. And when you use my link in the description to sign up for your free trial, you get 100 free download credits. And these credits can be used in the sound store to start building or expanding your sample library, or in the record store to help you start building some new tracks. Tracklib was already easy to use and always royalty free, meaning not having to clear your samples before a song's release. But now that they've combined the record store and the sounds capability in one subscription, it really is your one-stop shop sample subscription. And if you're watching this and you're new to music production, this is a fantastic offer for you to get started building up your sample library using Tracklib. So go to tracklib.com/DRU, that's tracklib.com/Drew, or click the link in the description for your 100 free download credits. Just a note, when you sign up, you will have to put in a payment method, but you can cancel and you do not lose access to your samples when you cancel. Thank you to Tracklib for sponsoring this video. Now let's continue the conversation about samples. Here's a track that I made using only sounds from either the Tracklib record store or Sounds Collection. As you can hear in this track, I have everything I need to create a song, only using sampled sounds. I have kicks, snares, different varying melodic instruments, low-end bass, and ear candy percussion and effects. Another thing you can use to make sounds with in your computer only are virtual instruments or software instruments. These are either meticulously sampled instruments like pianos or different stringed instruments, or soft synths or software synths that use different oscillators or wavetables to create the sounds internally. And there are 3 places I always recommend people new to music production get started with. That's Native Instruments Complete Start Bundle. If you want to deep dive on that bundle, I made a video recently going through every aspect and showcasing the incredible free stuff you get in that bundle. But you get pianos, you get synths, you get reverbs, you get effects, you get some insanely great stuff for free in that bundle. Another super popular one is from a company called Spitfire. They generally work in orchestral instruments, and they have a free batch of instruments called Spitfire Labs. It's a collection of sample-based pianos and strings and horns and vocals and percussion instruments that you can just download and use at your will. And then another thing that you can grab for free is a synth called Vital that I absolutely love. It's a little bit easier to wrap your head around what things are going where, because it does a really good job of showing you where things are going. You can also load up a preset and kind of reverse engineer what some of these things are doing. Also, to be honest, it just sounds great. So now we have things to make music with, but how are we going to hear them? There are kind of two routes you can go with this. You can either go with speakers or headphones. And for newer producers, I tend to recommend a great set of headphones. These are my Sennheiser HD280 Pros. I think they were like $100. They're incredible tracking headphones, and they sound pretty good as well. Especially if you're getting into music production for the first time. You don't want to spend a ton of money, obviously, but you do want what you're listening to translate well. I've also recently been using the Slate VSX modeling headphones and have been really enjoying these a lot. These are headphones that mimic really big studios, and it kind of makes you feel like you're sitting in a really nice studio with all of their treatment and the way that room sounds and the different speaker options that you have. And you can really quickly jump from different studio to different studio, and also things like cars and headphones and boom boxes and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool, but they were a little more expensive. I think they were like $500 with the software. And if you want to go the speaker route, that's great. It does just require you to think a lot more about the room you're in and how the space is treated. You don't want a lot of loud reflections on the wall. You can see I have like panels on my wall and stuff because I do have some speakers that I use a lot. And a lot of the times you also want like a cloud floating above your head to negate some, ceiling frequency bounce. And you get into a lot of like acoustician math when it comes to getting speakers, and that's a lot to put on somebody who's really just getting into this for the first time. So I love a great pair of speakers, and I really think they're a step up in some capacities. But I think for newer people, I tend to lean towards, like the headphones. There's some Sony pairs that a lot of people really like as well, or the Sennheisers that I was talking about, because they allow you to have a controlled environment and consistency. One of the biggest things that you kind of learn over the years is your listening environment being consistent, whether they're headphones or your speakers and your room, and where you're listening and what you're listening to kind of helps how you create music. This tends to be a little bit more prominent in like mixing, less so for music production, because in music production, you're being a lot more creative and you're just kind of throwing paint at the wall and making really cool tracks. But you do have to balance making sure that your tracks sound great. You want them to sound like songs while you're working on them, especially when you get to tracking vocals or something. You want to make sure that the track, the beat, whatever sounds really, really great, even before you send it to somebody like me for mixing. For some people, you might get to this point and this might be all you need to get started. You can use samples, you can use virtual instruments, you have your headphones to hear with and your computer to work on, your DAW to work in, and that's all you really need. And you can get started making beats or making whatever you want. And that's very genre or personal dependent. So depending on what you're trying to do, you actually might need something to record with. I'm talking about microphones. Now, for some of my newer people, I'm just going to give you a quick overview, a distinction of different types of microphones. There's really two main different types of microphones, and we're talking about dynamic and condenser microphones. Dynamic microphones are something like this SM7B that I'm talking into here, or maybe if you've ever seen, stage musicians, they're using like an SM58 that they're singing into, or maybe like an SM57 that they have on, pointed at their guitar amps or on their drums. And those are all great examples of dynamic microphones. Those generally take loud noise sources. On the other hand, you have condenser microphones like my Neumann TLM-102 here. These microphones are great for capturing detail, things like acoustic guitars, singing vocals. You'll use them for things like the overheads of drums or maybe like a hi-hat. You can also use them for things like shakers and tambourines and other things that you want to capture every possible detail from. Now, obviously, these are very broad definitions, and there's like very technical reasons why they're different and a bunch of other options as well. But these are like the main two things that as a beginner, you're really going to want to focus on. And for beginners, it kind of really depends on your situation, what you're going to need to gravitate towards, and also what kind of music you're doing. Metal versus soft acoustic, you're going to need very different types of microphones. But if you're looking for a condenser microphone and you want a workhorse and it's pretty budget friendly, I would suggest the Audio-Technica AT2020. They're about $100. You can even find them used for cheaper online. And I know people that have used these things for all sorts of different tracking. They sound great on acoustics, actually. And they're super budget conscious, especially if you're trying to do, like I said, you want that detail. You need to capture acoustic guitars or soft or medium, good singing vocals. If you're looking for a dynamic microphone, you can find something like the SM58. Honestly, these things are workhorses. I have like 4 of these in the studio because you never know what you can use them for. They're pretty good for podcasting. They're really great for singing. They're really great for doing demos. I've even tracked an acoustic on one of these before, and you can make it sound pretty good with some processing in post. And you can find them online used for really, really cheap. So I don't know how much you would need anything when you're first starting out. I think those two would be like your cheapest options. But if you're looking for something maybe a little step up, or maybe you just want something to track demos with and you don't want to worry about needing an interface and you just want to go direct from mic straight to your computer or laptop, you can check out the Shure MV7 Plus. It's like a version of the SM7B that I'm using. It's really cool. You can go USB-C directly into your computer and have pretty good gain control. It is a dynamic mic, but has pretty good detail from what I can tell. And then if you're looking for something a little more left field or maybe like a combination between, a dynamic and a condenser mic, I would look at the Slate ML2. It's a pencil condenser mic. It's like this big. And it comes with software that allows it to emulate different microphones, a lot of dynamic and condenser microphones. So it can kind of act as an in-between on both. And they're like $150 brand new. It's crazy what they can do. And honestly, for beginners, it's super cool because it comes with a lot of really cool software with the cost of the microphone. So it's something that I would definitely suggest if you're into more microphone-based music, that I would suggest looking into that one as well. So a lot of you are probably asking me, how in the world am I getting my voice to go into the microphone and then into my computer? Well, most of these mics are going to need something to go in between those, and that's called an audio interface. So the audio interface allows you to plug in your microphone with an XLR cable like so, and then this end goes into the audio interface. As you're singing, la 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 la, it reads the information and transcribes that information into ones and zeros, allowing your digital audio workstation to then translate that into audio. And that's really like a rough approximation of what it does. It also does the opposite. When you hit play, it reads those ones and zeros, retranslates it back to audio, and sends it back to your speakers and headphones, ideally the same as you tracked it. It's essentially a way for you to plug in a microphone and get it into your computer. Without it, you would need, like I said, the Shure MV7 has like a USB direct into your computer. You'd need something like that. And those don't always sound the best. That one sounds pretty good, but that mic is also a little more pricey. So if you don't want to do that and you want to use something like a Shure SM58 or an SM57 or something that you already have, or even the Slate ML2, you're gonna need an audio interface to get that mic to go into your computer. And very similar to DAWs, your interface, though it can have an effect on how you record, generally is kind of up to your taste and how you like to work, or what sounds, quote unquote, you like, and where you're kind of heading towards. 3 options I tend to recommend to people are the UAD Volt 1, which I just looked up and is currently what I'm seeing at about $140 brand new. The Solid State SSL 2, which as I'm looking at it is $180, and then slightly higher priced and slightly higher quality than those two, the Audient ID4, which is about $210 brand new from what I'm seeing. These all give you basic functionality of being able to record at least one channel, have a headphone mix, be able to send out to speakers if that's what you're looking for. And I believe they all have combo jacks or something so that you can plug in both a microphone XLR cable or a guitar direct into it, and then use things like amp sims or digital amplifiers to then track your guitars or bass through. Next is something that some of you will need and some of you might not need, and that's a MIDI controller. For those of you who don't know what a MIDI controller is, it is like those tiny little keyboards that you see, very similar to this one that I have on my desk, and you can turn it on and you can play, you know, a C or an A or something, and then you can have that connect to a software instrument, and then that is how you track those instruments inside your software. You have different variations. That version I just showed you is only piano keys. I have this Native Instruments Machine Micro, and it is just pads and like control functions, but no piano keys. It's just beat pads. And then I also have this Arturia Mini Lab Mark II, and it is, you know, keys down here and then beat pads up here with some controlling knobs up here. And depending on what you do, you might only need the beat pads, you might only need the keyboard stuff, and you can play the drums on the keyboard notes. You just kind of have to do some mapping and some configuration there. And that's why I was saying that not everybody's going to need this. Some people that use samples just drag and drop samples in. They don't necessarily hand play everything. Hand playing a lot of your drums in certain genres makes it feel a little more real rather than so static on the grid. But once again, some of you are going to need that and some of you aren't. These kind of vary. I think the cheapest one was the Arturia, the Mini Lab Mark II. Is I want to say like $100. You could find some for $50. You can find different ones depending on what your needs are, and there's a whole rabbit hole of different budget MIDI controllers that you can go down and find. And yeah, there's millions of videos about those things. I wouldn't make a MIDI controller a very high priority on your list. Honestly, I would attempt to work without one first if I could. And obviously, depending on what genre, you might need it. So there are also some things that I didn't mention that I don't think that people that are new to music production will need. Things like preamps, things like synthesizers. I think hardware preamps and outboard preamps are things that, you know, you kind of grow into. Same for like hardware compressors and EQs. And like hardware synthesizers, if you already have one, like that's awesome. Definitely use that. But I don't think it's something you need to go drop like thousands of dollars on. So I don't generally recommend those types of things to newer music producers because it just kind of gets confusing. So if I were a new producer and I were building a setup, what would I choose? I'm going to give you 2 really good examples here. So I'm going to do a hip hop beat maker, and then I'm going to do somebody who works in like folk Americana country style music. So for our hip hop producer, I'm going to start with a laptop computer because I want to be able to travel. I want to be able to go sit in on sessions, but I want to be able to work while I do those things. Or maybe go sit in a coffee shop or a bar or something and catch a vibe and make some beats there. I'm going to use Ableton Live because I really like Ableton Live and I think it's really awesome, especially for beat makers. I think it is super cool. Also, there's a lot of free cool stuff in Ableton Live that comes with it. If you want more, you can check out some of my other videos on why Ableton Live is really cool. Next, I'm going to go to the link of this video and I'm going to go to TrackLib and I'm going to start downloading kicks, snares in the genre that I'm going to make, so whether that's lo-fi hip hop or trap or whatever. I'm going to start getting some hi-hats. I'm going to start getting some 808s, and I'm going to start making some beats with those. And then I'm going to go to the virtual instruments that I suggested, mainly Native Instruments and Vital. For listening, I'm going to use the Sennheiser HD280 Pros. I really like these, and they actually give me a lot of isolation and they have pretty good low end. So I really like listening to those. I'm used to listening to those and I like working on them. They're good for long work sessions for me. I'm not going to get a microphone because I don't need to worry about having a microphone because I'm not tracking anybody's vocals. I'm just making really cool beats for people to vibe with. And because I'm not getting a microphone, I also won't need an interface. There's really no point because I can just plug my headphones directly into the headphone jack of my laptop and just work out of there, especially for me getting started on probably a lower budget. I'm not having to worry about spending my money there. I am, however, going to get a MIDI controller as this beat making producer, probably something like the Akai MPK Mini, the Mini Lab Arturia that I showed you, or the Alesis V Mini, which I'm finding right now used on Reverb for like $62, which is a great deal. Probably would lean into the Alesis because it's really small profile, so I can throw it in a backpack with my laptop and my headphones and just get to work. I'm coming out pretty inexpensive for the most part there. The final dollar will be here. And now for my folk Americana country producer, I'm gonna also start on a computer because I really need the flexibility of being able to edit. I'm gonna use Pro Tools actually for my digital audio workstation of choice because I personally really like how Pro Tools tracks more organic acoustic instruments. As my Americana producer, I am also going to go to TrackLib, but I'm going to get very different types of samples. I'm going to aim for shakers. I'm going to aim for tambourines. I'm going to aim for maybe some weird percussion sounds and things that I can kind of use as more texture. For the virtual instruments, I'm actually mainly going to use the Native Instruments free stuff and the Spitfire Labs because I want some strings, I want some really good piano sounds, and I want some good guitar amp plugins and random little organic textures. As far as what I'm hearing with, still gonna stay with the Sennheiser HD280 Pros because I think they are probably the best option for kind of anybody starting out. I am going to grab a microphone, which would be the Slate ML2. I'm going to grab that for $150-ish. I'm going to grab an interface, which is going to be the UAD Volt 1 because I really like UAD stuff, and that's what I use here. And on top of that, you kind of get some free plugins, I believe, with the UAD Volt stuff. And I'm actually not going to worry about a MIDI controller for my Americana producer because I can hand plug in some piano notes. Piano is actually mainly going to be doubling things like guitars and mandolin. So I'm going to be doing a lot of tracking into microphones. So for my Americana producer, assuming that I have some sort of laptop or computer to work on, we don't need to worry about that. Pro Tools is roughly a $35 a month subscription for Pro Tools, and it comes with some really good plugins as well with that subscription. I'm going to get the free samples in the description for all of my percussion elements. I'm going to grab those free virtual instruments from Native Instruments and Spitfire Labs. I'm going to grab my Sennheiser headphones, and I'm going to grab the Slate ML2 and the Volt 1. And so I believe I'm coming out around $320 for that. I could be missing something that I'm not thinking about, but I am locked into a monthly subscription for Pro Tools. So honestly, you could go the Cubase route. That would be another really good option, or the Logic Pro route, which is roughly like $200. So I would probably, of those, I'd probably pick Logic Pro because I'm more used to it. So here is the price with the Pro Tools subscription, and here is the price if I got Logic. And that is everything that you need to start producing music as far as gear goes. There's a lot of information in here and it can be a little confusing. So if you need me to go into any more depth on any very specific section of this, please drop it in the comments and I would love to make a video, maybe deep diving on more individual sections of this. Also, while you're down there, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe if you got something out of this, or if you enjoyed watching it, you made it this far. So thank you very much for that. And if that free Native Instruments bundle piqued your interest, there's going to be a video right over here where I deep dive into every single aspect of that bundle and explain how useful it is and why you should pick it up immediately. So I'll see you over there in that video. Later.